En ég ætla að geta þess að seinna í þættinum hér viðtal við Michael Pollan. Þetta stórmerkilegur maður, hann hefur skrifað mat, matvælaframleiðslu, mataræði, hann hefur skrifað 3 bækur allavega og þær hafa allar orðið metsölubækur í Bandaríkjunum og svo nýjasta sem heitir Food Rules á ensku komin út hjá Sölku og hún inniheldur einfaldar leiðbeiningar það hvernig maður getur borðað hollt en þetta ekki bara hollustu, þetta líka að vera í sátt og samlyndi við náttúruna því eins og hann segir það að borða eru helstu tengsl okkar við náttúruna og þannig að þetta líka umhverfisvernd og hollustu og mataræði og líka svona einfaldir hlutir eins og hvernig á maður að versla í súpermarkaði á maður að kaupa matinn sinn á bensínstöð þannig að hann kemur inn á ýmsa hluti Michael Pollan og það mjög myndi ég segja stórfróðlegt viðtal við hann hérna seinna í þættinum. Við fáum svo Michael Pollan hérna eftir til að ræða þessa merkilegu bók sem heitir Mataræði á íslensku, Food Rules á ensku. Hann hvað maður að segja, metsölöfundur, dálítið svona eins og gúrú og ótrúlega áhugavert að heyra hvernig hann talar mat í víðu samhengi og þá ekki bara það sem við setjum í magan okkur, heldur líka náttúruna, menninguna og allt sem fylgir því að borða. Michael Pollan, welcome to Silver Ales.
Thank you very much.
I have here 2 of your books, Food Rules and Defense of Food. There's a third one called The Omnivore's Dilemma.
Right.
And you're a journalist, you're a book writer, you're a lecturer, professor at Berkeley, and your main subject is food. And food is, of course, very important. As, well, your title, Food Rules. These are not just rules about how to eat it, but it's an indication that food the importance of food.
Well, it's the most important industry in the world, the biggest, but it's also our most powerful connection to the natural world. And it's something that we've forgotten. And in a way, what I'm doing would have been impossible to do 100 years ago because everybody knew this.
Yeah.
Everybody understood that nature is what feeds us, not industry. But in a highly industrialized economy, the links between us and our food, the animals and the plants and the fungi that feed us, become obscure.
Basically, you say that every generation before us, they just ate what their mothers cooked.
Yeah, tradition told you what to eat. And the power of tradition over food has been weakened, partly from food marketing, from the industry's desire to sell us novel foods, and fast food in particular, and that they have undermined, I think, the authority of tradition with these, glistening, beautifully packaged, very seductive new foods, and the convenience of them, the novelty of their flavors. And so the authority of the mothers and the grandmothers has been eroded to a large extent, certainly in America, although it's happening all over the world. The industrialization of the human diet is a global phenomenon. It's happening right now in China. And so a lot of my work involves reminding people of the connections, where their food comes from. That's another very obvious thing. Everybody knew where their food used to come from.
Yeah.
But now you look at a plate of food and you I wonder what country produced that. And that burger, that burger might have the meat of 200 different cows in it from 4 continents now.
Yeah.
And they don't tell us this.
and there are all sorts of strange names.
Yeah.
Yeah, you have names.
The chemicals.
The chemicals, the numbers and the names.
Many unfamiliar, many ingredients in our food that your grandmother would not recognize, indeed that you might not recognize, some of them are petroleum products. They're not even organic products. Well, petroleum is organic, but not in the sense that we think of it.
And this is bad of course this is bad for us and it's bad for the environment.
Yeah, it's bad in many, many ways. Let's talk about the way it's good, though, first. Because it's important to acknowledge the achievements of this food industry before we take them apart. The fact is that they have made food very inexpensive. They have made it possible for people to eat meat every day. Meat used to be a special occasion food in much of the world, and it still is in a lot of places. And they have made the food, transcend the seasons. We can have tomatoes all year round. We can have anything we want whenever we want it. This is an achievement. We must pay respect to the achievement. But we also must pay attention to the cost of that achievement. And the cost is enormous. The cost to our health and the public health, the cost to the environment, to the water, to the soil, and we're learning to the atmosphere, because this industrial food system is responsible for a third of the greenhouse gases by some estimates. It's a big part of the climate change problem.
But as you point out, well, in the title of your book, we are omnivores. Men eat basically everything.
Yes, and it's a good thing too, because we couldn't live in places like Iceland if we weren't omnivores.
Yes,
we would still be in Africa eating the one plant that we evolved to eat, like the koala.
But our diet has been narrowing to products that are based on corn, on soy and wheat.
Yes. Yeah. And this is one of the mysteries of the supermarket that confronted me. It looks like a very diversified landscape.
Yes.
There are thousands of food products. In the United States, there's 17,000 new food products every year introduced. Most of them fail, but they try. So it looks like this cornucopia of variety. But in fact, if you break down and look at where the carbon in all this food comes from, and food is mostly carbon, you will find it comes from a cornfield, a soy field, or a wheat field.
Yes.
And that basically we've gotten very good at taking a handful of crops, simple crops that are very productive, and breaking them down and putting them back together in the form of processed food. Everything from meat, which in America we feed corn. Beef gets fed corn, even though it's not very good for the cows, and not very good for the quality of the meat. And then processed foods. If you take I don't know if you have Twinkies here, but that's a very common cake with cream stuffed in the middle. It's a very long golden thing. And it's kind of an iconic processed food. It's got 37 ingredients, about 30 of them are derived from corn. So all those obscure chemical labels on the side of the packages in the ingredient list, most of them are corn, maize, and or soy, which is also. The corn gets broken down into carbohydrates for the food, refined sugars, high fructose corn syrup, and the soy gets turned into the fats in which it's fried, and some of the protein fed to the animals. So it's 3/4 of our diet comes from 4 crops.
It is very narrow. It's
very narrow, and you're right. As omnivores, we need a great variety of we need between 75 and 100 different chemical compounds to be healthy, and you're not going to get that from a diet of processed corn and soy and wheat. So we do need to diversify our diet without question, and that means diversifying our fields.
Yes. Let's look at the supermarket where basically all of us shop. One thing you say is that you should shop. Well, not only supermarkets, but that you should shop on the edges of a supermarket. Why should you do that?
Well, traditionally in a supermarket, and I'm sure this is true in Iceland as well, although I haven't yet been to one of your supermarkets.
They're just the same.
Yeah, so I'm looking forward to going. I'm going to go to one tomorrow. The perimeter is where you put the perishable food. So that's where the produce is, the fruits and vegetables. That's where the milk is, usually way in the back. That's where the fish is, and the meat and the dairy products. And the middle of the store is where you put the processed foods, the things that never die and never go bad, the eternal foods. And the reason for that is that the stuff along the edge goes bad. It rots. So you need to move it around. You need to move it quickly, and you want it near the loading dock and the trucks. The stuff in the middle you can put on the shelves for a year, sometimes more. And so that's where you get into trouble in the supermarket. When you buy all your food in the middle, you're buying lots of processed food. So to the extent, and you're not going to be able to do this exclusively, but to the extent you can confine most of your shopping to the edge, you're going to eat a healthier diet.
But you say also that we should get out of the supermarket.
When you can go to the supermarket. Well, the farmer's market, I think, is a very good alternative. We have had, in the United States, an explosion of farmer's markets. There are 4,500 of them right now. It's doubled twice in the last 5 years. We also have CSAs, which are farm shares. You buy a share in a farm's output, and every week you get a box of produce for the growing season. That's another good alternative. So there are these alternative food economies are springing up all over the world. And we need to support them with our dollars and or a kroner or whatever. And we need to vote with our forks and help this new industry get started. because it offers us healthy food, it offers farmers a way to stay in business and compete, and it keeps our land in farmland so it doesn't get developed.
Yeah.
So it has many, many benefits.
Another maxim of yours is that we should eat food that rots.
Yes, yes. A food that you have to think about it. A food that doesn't rot. You know, we have these foods that you can. I just bought in the store I was in Louisville, Kentucky, and I was buying some props for a talk, and there was a package of pot roast beef with gravy that was sold in plastic, shrink wrapped, and it was not refrigerated, and it just on the shelf. It's dehydrated or something. I don't know how they do it. Freeze dried. And it said that the freshness date, you could eat it until December 2011. Now, how real can that be? How do they do that? It's an achievement. But it seems to me that one of the reasons food rots is because other organisms are interested in them. Bacteria, fungi, mice, rats. They're not interested in a lot of processed food.
Yeah.
If you put that Twinkie out there, they would not eat it.
You say we should avoid foods that are advertised on television.
Yeah, that's a weird one. I'll tell you why.
Yeah.
The healthiest food in the store is the quietest food. It's the food that doesn't boast about itself.
Yeah.
It's the tomato, it's the apple, it's the kale. They don't have a big budget, the people who grow these foods.
No.
The only foods that have big budgets are foods sold by big companies. And these are foods that are processed.
Yeah.
That's the most profitable food in the store. You start with cheap raw ingredients, corn or soy or wheat, and you add layers of processing. You know, cereal, say. You have got 4 cents worth of grain that you turn into $4 box of Cheerios, and then you turn that into an $8 box of cereal bars. That's how you make money. That's where you have the budget for advertising. And so if you avoid foods that are advertised on television, you will tend to avoid also the most deceitful foods, the ones that have health claims on them. The cereals that tell you that they'll prevent swine flu or improve your son's focus in school. I mean, we have these claims on our cereal boxes.
Oh, yeah.
But the really healthy food is quiet.
It doesn't need to make health claims.
Well, it would help if they could. They don't have the money to make health claims.
No.
One of the reasons I came up with that rule, though, about TV is that the industry was, which is incredibly clever, was co-opting some of the messages that me and other critics were putting out there. For example, I was saying don't buy foods with more than 5 ingredients.
Yes.
Suddenly they were advertising, Haagen-Dazs was advertising that their ice cream, they started calling their ice cream 5.
Okay.
Because it only had 5 ingredients. Now that's great. What did it used to have? 5 ingredients. They didn't change anything. They just started bragging about the fact they had 5 ingredients. It's still ice cream. I mean, ice cream's wonderful, but it's not health food. So I realized that they're so clever at turning these messages around that we should just tune out all the health claims on the food, and that means tuning out the food that's advertised on television.
Don't eat where you fuel.
Yes.
That's another one I like.
Cars should eat differently than people.
Yes.
I feel strongly that they have different nutritional needs. They eat a lot of petroleum, of course. And now, in the United States, when you go to the gas station, petrol station, you get this whole buffet of foods. But what kind of food is it? It's all processed food. There's no fresh produce there. There's maybe you get some nuts in a bag. That's okay. That's not so bad. But it's usually chips and candy and soda. And ironically, it's usually made from corn, which a lot of now the gas is made from corn because of ethanol.
Yes.
So actually, we are eating the same thing as our cars. We're eating corn-based sweeteners and alcohol.
But one more. Don't eat anything your grandmother wouldn't recognize as food.
Yeah. Well, this is a way to, this goes back to your earlier point about reconnecting us to tradition. And if you're confronting a strange food in the supermarket, some novelty of the food industry, the example I like to use is Go-Gurt, which is a yogurt that comes in a plastic tube. It looks like toothpaste.
Yes.
And you open it and squeeze it into your mouth. It's a very strange product. Lots of chemical additives in it for color and texture. So when you're in the supermarket, rolling down the aisles, just imagine your grandmother or your great-grandmother was with you. Would she recognize that product as food?
Yeah.
I don't think she would. And if she wouldn't recognize it as food, then it's not food. And a lot of the products for sale in the supermarket, I don't think we should dignify with the word food. So I call them edible food-like substances.
Yes.
It's a little bit different.
Yeah.
And so the grandmother test, it's really just a kind of mental algorithm to help you sort out the real stuff from the fake stuff. And since we've lost touch, I think you can imagine your grandmother and reconnect with what real food is.
There's another substance that is used very much these days. It's corn syrup.
Yes.
Fructose.
High fructose
corn syrup. I don't think people realize that very much.
It's all over the food supply.
Yeah.
Sometimes it's called HFCS. Sometimes it's called high fructose corn syrup. Sometimes it's called crystalline glucose. It has some other names. But what it is it's a relatively new process. It was invented by the Japanese in the 1970s to use a certain enzyme to take normal corn syrup, which is mostly glucose, and make it much sweeter by turning some of it into fructose. It isn't clear that it's any different for you as a matter of health. It's a replacement for sugar because it's much cheaper than sugar. And what that has meant is that it made sweetness so cheap that manufacturers started putting it in products that were never sweetened before. So it ends up in breads, it ends up in chips, crackers, it ends up in soups, it ends up in condiments like ketchup and pickles. And it's sneaking all this sugar into our diet. And we don't, even people who try to avoid too much sugar can't avoid it because it's everywhere. And so one of my suggestions in food rules is avoid products with high fructose corn syrup. Not because it's so dangerous, but because it's a marker of processed food. I mean, who do you know who cooks with high fructose corn syrup? Nobody has it at home, except in food products. So if you want to avoid processed foods, that's a good way to do it.
I'd like to get to nutritionism.
Yes.
That's another phenomenon that you can sort of, you eat yourself healthy by sort of
obsessing about biochemistry.
Yes. And you're very critical about that.
Well, you know, we've tried this experiment. For the last 30 years or so, you know, we all have educated ourselves supposedly about antioxidants and vitamins and folic acid and now probiotics and prebiotics. We have a head full of biochemistry that actually we don't understand very well, but we know that this is supposed to be good, this is supposed to be evil. And so I'm going to eat products with antioxidants without trans fats, and then I'll be healthy.
And it changes because
that's the problem.
They told us that fat was animal fat would kill you.
Was evil, and
that butter would just murder
and they replaced it with margarine, which turned out to be much less healthy than butter.
Now butter is back.
So the problem is there's two problems. Nutrition science is very hard to do. We don't really understand nutrition that well yet. The way I see it, nutrition science is a very young science. It's kind of where surgery was in the year 1650. Okay, very promising, very interesting, but not yet ready to take on our bodies without great risk. Nutritionism, this way of looking at food through this pseudo-scientific lens, by reducing it to the nutrients. Nutritionism is an ideology, basically. Like any other ideology, it just has these assumptions about how to look at things that you're not even aware of. First assumption is that nutrients are what's important about food. You don't have to understand salmon, you have to understand omega-3s, and you have to understand, you know, other fats, and you have to understand protein. No, you have to understand salmon. And so we see through foods, and we see the nutrients, or we think we do. That's one premise. The other premise is that you can divide any food into good and evil nutrients. And if you eat enough good ones, omega-3s, and avoid enough bad ones, trans fats or sugar, you'll be healthy. But you see, the problem with this whole way of eating is that it depends on getting it right. That we know what a bad nutrient is and we know what a good nutrient is. And if you look at the history of the last 100 years, we keep changing our mind because the science is so uncertain. Saturated fat, which we were all taught will give you heart attacks, there is not strong evidence of that. If you are a smoker and you eat a lot of saturated fat, it may be a problem. But if you're not, it may not be that bad at all.
But so everybody moved from saturated fat into carbs.
Exactly.
Carbohydrates.
And you see, and that's the problem with this way of, this Manichaean good, bad nutrient thing. Because as soon as you demonize one nutrient, you give a free pass to another. So we said fat is evil. Well, that must mean you can eat all the carbohydrates you want.
Yes.
And this low-fat craze that we've been on for the last 20 or 30 years, in fact, has been a period of rising weight because we're binging on carbohydrates. Because soda, Coca-Cola doesn't have any fat, so that must be okay.
Yeah.
And if you look at the dietary statistics, you find that since we started demonizing fat, people's consumption of carbohydrates has gone through the roof.
Yes.
In America, we're eating 400 more calories per person per day since the low-fat campaign. And we've gotten very heavy on this low-fat campaign. So I don't think this way of approaching food works. I think we need to return the focus to whole foods, to real foods. And then it gets very simple.
Yeah, your message is very simple. It is, well, your first maxim is that you should, isn't it the first
Eat
one?
food.
Eat food, yes, that you should eat food, and then you should eat food, but mostly plants.
Mostly plants because, for a couple of reasons. We're eating too much meat. We're eating too much meat for our own health and for the health of the environment.
Yes.
And I don't know what the figures are in Iceland, but in the United States we eat about 208 pounds of meat per person per day. It's like 500 kilos of meat. I'm sorry, per year.
You have, of course, these ridiculous steaks.
We do. We have these giant steaks, and we have meat for breakfast, and we have meat for lunch, and it's just too much meat.
It's obscene.
Now, the problem may not be the meat. Meat is nutritious food. Meat is good food. People have been eating meat for many thousands of years. But it's pushing the vegetables off the plate.
Yeah.
And vegetables, we know, have a lot of very positive things about them. We don't know exactly what they are, but we do know that populations that eat a lot of vegetables, say that eat a pound of vegetables a day, have half the rate of cancer of most people. Yeah. So vegetables are good for you. And either, too much meat is bad, or it just pushes the vegetables out. Yeah. So I think that, I love meat. I'm a carnivore. But I think we have to return it to its old status as something you have a couple times a week, or you use to flavor your food. Yeah. You mix it in a stir fry. You take just a little bit of meat can go a long way if you eat it with vegetables.
That's the Mediterranean diet, really, where people really couldn't afford meat, and you can't grow stocks in the way that you can on the plains of America.
Yeah. Meat, it's funny, meat and sugar are similar in a way. In nature, they're rare and special. You can't get sugar in nature. You get fruit, which is seasonal and comes packaged with all these good things, and water. But when you can take something that is very special, that our bodies love, we're genetically hardwired to like meat, to like fat, and to like sugar and salt, and then you make them common and cheap, of course we're going to binge on it.
Yes. Another thing which is interesting, and I think it is interesting in this age of eating in front of either the television set or the computer,
or the car.
Yeah, or in the car, is that you recommend that people eat meals.
I know, there's a radical idea.
It is, actually. It's very simple, but it's radical.
Well, I mean, that's,
Tell your kid to come to the table.
Yes. Yeah. I think the family meal is one of the most important institutions of a civilization. I really do. It's where we socialize our children. We teach them manners. They learn about politics. I learned all about politics listening to my father rant about the Vietnam War, I mean, this is where there's so much information that is conveyed at the table. Plus, people learn to eat the same thing. Yes. We're moving to a society where every member of the family is getting a different microwavable entree. And when you share food, magic things happen. This is why at summit meetings they always they have a banquet. This is why, you sit down with your friends or even your enemies, and amazing things happen when you eat from the same platter. And we're losing this as we go to this individualistic eating. Yeah. And so I think it's very important to civilization, actually, to eat together. And Americans are now eating 20% of their meals in the car. Yeah. It's very isolating. Yes. It can't be good for your digestion. And think about what kind of food you can eat in the car. Yes. I mean, you can't eat anything that involves a knife and fork. Yeah. You eat snacks.
Is your message? Well, of course, they're bestsellers. Your book, they've been sold by almost.
It's
so
amazing.
Your message is getting through.
It's getting through. But as you know, a bestseller is still reaches a small percentage. I mean, the United States has 310 million people, and if you sell 100,000 books, you have a bestseller. So you're not reaching everybody. But the message is getting out there. There is a food movement rising in America. It's one of the most exciting social movements right now to reform our food system, our agriculture. So, yes, there's rising consciousness. And the reason is, it's not because of me or these books, it's because people know there's something wrong. They look around them and they see, they know someone who has type 2 diabetes. Children are getting this. It used to be called adult onset diabetes. Children are getting it. Rising levels of obesity. Lots of chronic disease that didn't used to exist in the numbers it does. And all the environmental problems tied to the food system. Pollution from feedlots are affecting people in the Middle West. The water is contaminated in many places. So people know that there's something wrong with the way we're eating.
And the horrible industrialization of like chicken farming and
the feedlots.
Something that's sort of
it's shocking.
It baffles the mind. Yeah.
It's shocking, and very few of us have seen these places because they're hidden away, and they don't allow journalists to come. Usually, they're very secretive about what they're doing, and the images on the packages still are very pastoral. I mean, it looks like Grandpa's farm. Yeah. But in fact, when you go to these places, and that's what started me writing about this, was visiting some of these feedlots, chicken farms, pig farms, and just being, these are visions of hell, these places. And to realize that you're supporting these places when you buy that fast food hamburger is enough to change the way you eat. I think we should all see these places. I think children should go on field trips to feedlots and slaughterhouses, and then things would change overnight.
Yeah. Of course, this is touched upon in the film, Food Incorporated, where you're one of the stars of that film.
Yeah. And it came out of my research for Omnivore's Dilemma, the book you mentioned earlier, that's what opened my eyes. I went to industrial farms. I went to an industrial potato farm, actually, that had a tremendous effect on me. I love French fries, I love potatoes, and supposedly the best potatoes in the United States come from Idaho, this desert state in the West. And I went out there, and I went to a potato farm, and it was 36,000 acres, so 18,000 hectares, and it was organized. It's a desert, so there are these giant crop circles. Each of them is 50 or 75 acres with a big sweeping second hand that reaches the entire field and is constantly putting out water, pesticide, and fertilizer. It's all controlled, remote controlled. The farmer doesn't go into the field because the poisons are so toxic.
I see.
And the farmers also can't eat their potatoes until 6 weeks after they take them out of the ground. It's like a new carpet. You have to let the chemicals go off into the air before you can eat them. And I was shocked. I was like, that's where the potatoes come from? I had no idea. And there are these gorgeous potatoes, and they're full of pesticide. And the farmers, if that irrigation, it's called an irrigation pivot, if it breaks within 5 days of when he sprayed the most toxic chemicals, they let the whole crop go because they can't walk out into the field. It's such a powerful neurotoxin, brain toxin. So I didn't want to eat those kind of potatoes anymore.
No, I understand.
And so I began exploring the food chain and alternatives. And luckily, we have wonderful alternatives now. We have organic, we have biodynamic, we have local. So things are getting better in some ways.
I have to ask you about Iceland. I know you just came here recently. You got the
yesterday
the prize from Yoko Ono, and of course we have a lot of fish. We're quite close to nature. It's difficult to grow many things, but we can grow vegetables in greenhouses, and
you have the source of energy.
Isn't so bad. So we have an option to. But of course we have to import a lot of food, and you will see that our supermarkets are basically the same as everywhere else. So, your impression?
Well, it would be arrogant of me to say very much until I've learned more. And tomorrow, actually, I'm planning to visit some farms and learn more about your agriculture. You have some incredible advantages. You can grow indoors under glass without burning oil because of geothermal. And that's a tremendous advantage. And there are very few places in the world that can do that. So you can grow warm weather, tropical. You could grow tropical fish in rotation with vegetables in those greenhouses, and maybe people are doing it. I don't know. and you have a wonderful supply of fish, which is one of the healthiest foods, and becoming one of the most precious foods in the world.
It's becoming more and more expensive.
Cod, which used to be an inexpensive fish in the United States, is now a luxury fish.
But of course, we have to worry about levels of mercury in fish, and
well, we do, and the sustainability of the stocks. I mean, we have to realize that fish is really the last wild food, the last significant wild food that people eat, and we want to keep it going. Because it's a very important one. We have learned that the nutrients you get from fish are absolutely vital for brain development, for eyesight, all these kind of things. And most civilizations sprang up near bodies of water for that reason. The big human brain probably needs omega-3 fatty acids. So it's a precious asset and needs to be handled conservatively. You know, the scientists I talk to say they're more concerned actually about shortages of omega-3s in the human diet than they are about mercury.
Yeah.
So for what it's worth. And they advise even pregnant women that they're better off eating the fish than not eating the fish because it's such an important nutrient. But I understand that there's a revival of local agriculture going on here, and that there is a slow food movement or chapter that's very active.
Yeah.
And that there are certain chefs that are beginning to appreciate the traditional Nordic cuisines, and that's happening, you know, throughout Scandinavia as well. And so there's some very exciting developments, and reconnecting with our food traditions, reconnecting with what nature has to offer us and the place we happen to live is very valuable. You know, Icelanders are probably adapted to the traditional diet in various ways, and one of the things, it's wonderful to get these novel tastes from all over the world. But your native diet is a precious thing. And
it is the best thing to eat something that comes from close where you live.
Yeah.
It is.
Actually. Think about it. How many generations have been eating that way?
No, and we see, and when it's in season, also.
Well,
not when it's not a
too.
Strawberry grown in the south of Spain in February.
And you know what? It's not going to be very good. The thing we forget when we fly this food around the world, it seldom has any taste.
You are absolutely right.
And there's something quite beautiful about waiting until the local strawberries come in, because they're so much better, and it's a special occasion. And you lose that kind of savor, that edge, when you eat the same thing all year round. So I think eating seasonally is kind of fun, and I don't see a big sacrifice. And when I get home, I'm going to stop eating tomatoes for 6 months. They're almost done, and that's fine.
Okay, but you live in California.
I admit, we have it easier in many, many ways.
Thank you.
Your fish is much more beautiful.
Thank you for being on Silver Reyes, Michael Pollan.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much.